On behalf of the Justice Square Foundation, I am here to formally present our foundation's report on the landmark ruling of the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Yüksel Yalçınkaya versus Turkey. This ruling, which was delivered on September 26, 2023, isn't just about one individual. It addresses fundamental principles of law that affect, well, tens of thousands of people. It's a decision that really highlights the systematic unlawfulness of recent judicial practices and marks what should be a turning point for the Turkish legal system. Our report is structured to give you a clear and comprehensive analysis. We'll walk through the legal precedent that was set, the specific case of Mr. Yalçınkaya, the court's verdict, and what this ruling means for thousands of others. Then, we'll examine the current crisis of non-compliance, and finally, the consequences and what the future may hold. So let's begin by establishing the sheer significance of this judgment. It comes from the Grand Chamber, which is the highest judicial body of the European Court of Human Rights. That fact alone tells you how serious the legal issues at stake really are. The court's findings detail some really profound flaws in the Turkish judiciary's approach, especially after 2016. It characterized recent practices not as minor errors, but as systematically unlawful, violating the very core of the European Convention. To really understand the ruling, we have to look at the specific case that brought all these systemic issues into such sharp relief.
Yüksel Yalçınkaya was a public school teacher. He was dismissed by an emergency decree, then prosecuted and convicted for being a member of an armed terror organization. He was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison. But here's the crucial part. His conviction wasn't based on violent acts. It was based on a series of everyday lawful activities that the national courts decided to interpret as criminal evidence.
The primary basis for his conviction was the alleged use of a messaging app called Bylock, and this was supported by other activities like having a bank account at a particular bank and being a member of a legally registered union and association. So, presented with these facts, the European Court's verdict provided a clear, definitive legal answer. It found violations of 3 core articles of the European Convention on Human Rights. First, and this is so important, the court found a violation of Article 7, no punishment without law. The court determined that the national courts had retroactively criminalized lawful behavior. You simply cannot do that. It's strictly prohibited under international law. Second, a violation of Article 6, the right to a fair trial. The defense was never given a real, effective opportunity to contest the main evidence against them, this Bylock data. That lack of opportunity rendered the trial fundamentally unfair. And third, Article 11, freedom of association. The court affirmed that being a member of a legal union is a protected right. Using that membership as evidence of terrorism was an unlawful interference with this freedom. This finding really underscores that you cannot treat the exercise of a fundamental right as an indicator of criminal activity. The court was very explicit that the issues in Mr. Yalçınkaya's case were not isolated. No, they are part of a widespread systemic problem. And the scale of this is just immense. There are over 8,000 similar cases already pending before the court, all based on these same grounds.
And even that number doesn't tell the whole story. This affects a much larger group. Authorities in Turkey have identified around 100,000 people based on the very same contested evidence, many of whom have faced similar prosecutions.
Because the problem was so systemic, the court invoked Article 46 of the Convention. Now, this is a directive. It's an obligation for Turkey to not only fix Mr. Yalçınkaya's case, but to implement general measures to fix the underlying problem for everyone. So the ECHR's ruling offered a clear path to resolution. But the actions of the Turkish judiciary that followed have, unfortunately, created a new and deepening crisis. As this timeline shows, what we've seen is a systematic refusal by national courts at all levels to implement the ECHR's binding judgment. Turkey's high courts declined to apply the precedent. And then, upon retrial, Mr. Yalçınkaya was convicted again on the exact same grounds. And today, thousands of similar requests for retrial are just being systematically rejected. This refusal to comply with a final judgment has severe consequences. And not just for Turkey, but really for the entire European human rights protection system. The body that oversees the execution of court judgments, the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers, can initiate what's called a formal infringement procedure. It's a step-by-step process designed to address exactly this kind of situation. And the potential consequences here are significant. They range from diplomatic isolation to, in the most extreme case, expulsion from the organization itself, something we saw with Greece back in 1969 and with Russia in 2022.
This slide really lays it out in stark terms. You have the court's clear legal obligation on one side, and on the other, the current reality on the ground, which is just deepening the very problem the court sought to resolve.
So, in summary, our Foundation's analysis concludes that the Yalçınkaya ruling was a critical opportunity to restore legal certainty. Its non-implementation has now created a constitutional crisis and risks isolating Turkey within the European legal order.
This explainer has presented the key findings of our report, and we conclude with this critical question which now confronts the entire international community. When a member state openly defies a final binding judgment, what does that mean for the future of the European human rights system? Thank you.